Good evening. Parshas Miketz continues the fascinating story of Yosef and his encounter with his brothers after a 22-year absence. This story has universal appeal for everyone. Books and plays have been based on this theme. The famous play of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And the question is, why should that be the case? What is so attractive about the story of these parshiot, Vayeshev, Miketz, Vayigash, and Vayechi? I believe it's because the whole concept of the family feud is so commonplace and is all too real for so many people. If ever there was a parsha that you can relate to, I have to say it's simply heartbreaking to hear of stories of family rifts. Sometimes of people we may know. Sometimes we might even experience them in our own families. How can we heal those rifts? Is there anything we can do to ameliorate the hurt, the distrust, the disbelief? Perhaps it behooves us to take a closer look at our parsha, for in its verses it is embedded with many messages and hidden meanings relating to this very topic. We must ourselves profoundly analyze this parsha so that we may learn life lessons and apply it to our own life's circumstances. The first question that begs resolving is, how on earth did the sons of Jacob, representing the height of moral and ethical behavior, meticulous in their observance of Torah and mitzvos, how did they come to the conclusion that they should murder their own flesh and blood? It's a little extreme, to say the least, no? Secondly, why did Reuven, from amongst all the other brothers, come to Joseph's rescue, but ultimately fail to follow through? And why in our own parsha of Miketz is Reuven suddenly the angel, the chastiser of his brothers? He says to them, Halo amarti lachem lemar, al tichteu bayeled. Spoke I not unto you, saying, do not sin against that child. Velo shamatem, and ye would not hear. Vegam damo hine nidrash. Therefore also, behold, his blood is being venged on us. The brothers, on the other hand, they also make a comment in our parsha. They do regret their actions, but not the actual desire to kill Yosef. They actually felt that that was a grand idea. They just regretted not displaying mercy upon him when he begged them to spare his life. After all, even actual murderers are entitled to be shown some clemency, depending on the circumstances. They, however, say, we are verily guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us, meaning only the fact that they behave cruelly toward him, but not their original idea of somehow getting rid of him. That didn't trouble them at all. As far as Yosef's guilt, they were still convinced that he was guilty as charged. So what's the difference between Reuven and his brothers? Rabbi Soloveitchik, in a very beautiful essay, explains it in this way. You see, Reuven was no stranger to messing things up. Once before, we are told, he behaved impetuously. And as a result, he paid a very steep price. What did he do? He switched the beds of the concubines with that of his own mother's bed after the death of Rachel. Now, why did he do this? His intentions were actually very good on the surface. He really just wanted to defend his mother's honor. Jacob had moved the bed into the tent of the concubine, and he was insulted for his mother and wanted to return it. But what he didn't take into consideration was he did something much worse. He did it at the expense of his own father and his honor. When he did this shameful act, he depleted the high esteem which he and the other brothers always reserved for their father. Obviously, this act showed Dad was only a human being just like they. And when needed, even sons have a right to correct their fathers. Interestingly, if you look carefully at the verse where this happens, it says, Vayishma Yisrael, Israel heard what had transpired, what Reuven had done. Then almost immediately it says afterwards, the sons of Jacob were 12. Why the switch? Yisrael and then Jacob. You see, the name Israel represents majesty, dignity, royalty, nobility. True kings don't make mistakes. If they take a decision, especially a personal one, they have already thought it through very thoroughly and carefully. And if we don't understand, they must have their justifications. Reuven temporarily forgot to view his father in that way, the way God himself had told Jacob, "You are no longer Jacob, you are Israel." As a result of Reuven's deed, his father, on a subconscious level, became demoted in his eyes and in the eyes of his brothers to just plain old Father Jacob, the simple shepherd. The brothers, too, who also shared in Father Israel's glory, were now lowered in their status to simply Bnei Yaakov, the sons of Jacob. As a result of this calamity, the brothers lost a certain amount of respect for their father, as well as respect for themselves, not to mention each other. And that allowed a situation in which Yosef could be viewed not as a brother, but as a total outcast. By the time Joseph started arriving on the scene and announcing his monarchical designs based on his dreams and the coat of many colors that was donated to him by his father, the brothers freaked out. In antiquity, you see, kings had a right to kill whomsoever they didn't like. And the brothers felt that what Yosef was telling them was, "I'm your king." And they felt threatened to the point of feeling physically in danger. That Joseph, that 17-year-old kid, he needed to go. Reuven, however, saw things differently. He had learned his lesson. His father had rejected him. He felt isolated. he repented his mistaken attitude about his father, and he saw each and every one of his brothers as princes and as kings. Joseph's dreams were just for him reminding everybody that technically all of us are kings. All of us are royalty, nobility. The 11 sheaves of grain or the 11 stars didn't necessarily put down the brothers. It might have referred to just a number of people. But only Reuven understood this. The other brothers said, aha! He meant us. He wants us to bow down to him. He intends to lord it over us. That Joseph must die. So the first, most important, most essential, most decisive factor of a functional family is mutual respect. Every sibling has each their own talents, their own ways of looking at life. We must respect each other. When people can't respect their siblings, then internal strife is unavoidable. They will suspect and impute all sorts of terrible motivations upon their brother or sister, and will start to view them with jealous eyes. But the reality of this situation, of the supposed infraction of their sibling, may be totally benign and have nothing to do with the feelings of the other relative. So rule number 1 is always judge people favorably, everybody. In the words of Chazal, Havidan et kol adam lekav zchus, judge each and every person in a favorable light, in merit. Just because someone did something wrong, which you perceive as a slight or hurt, chances are that that offender never truly meant it that way, never had in mind that he was actually hurting you. I know of a story in which a terrible machlokes, an argument, broke out between one brother and another, because one brother did not invite the other to a wedding of one of his children. The offended brother was so furious, he never bothered to call to find out what had happened. He just decided that his brother hates him, and thus 20 years of sadness ensued. Until one fine day, 20 years later, a wedding invitation arrived in the mail. The postman, obviously embarrassed, apologized. It seems that the invitation was lost in the mail many years ago, and it was placed in the dead letter file of the local post office. The postman noticed it one day, and he knew the family, and he realized what must have happened, and he wanted to apologize and return the letter in person. In the interim, the brother who had the wedding had passed away, never to know why his brother hated him so. There's so much to say on this topic, and with your permission, perhaps, I'd like to continue about some other lessons that we can learn from these parshiot in the next couple of weeks, as we continue the saga and amazing story of Joseph and his amazing Technicolor dream coat. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.